His name was Gerald Edward Harmon. He was the kind of man who folded his napkin before a meal and always held the door open, not just for me, but for strangers. People loved him. Everywhere we went, he left a good impression. And for 31 years, I told myself that a man like that, a man so careful and decent and kind in public, must be just as good behind closed doors. I believed that. I really did. We met in the autumn of 1981. I was 24 years old, working at a small insurance office in Cincinnati. He walked in one afternoon with a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We married 18 months later in a little church outside the city. My mother cried. His mother cried. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and felt for the first time in my life like everything was going to be just fine. And for a long time, it was fine, truly. We had 2 children, a son, David, and a daughter, Marie. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with oak trees in the front yard. Gerald worked in regional sales. I worked part-time and raised our kids. We had dinners together most nights. We went to church on Sundays. We took vacations to the same lake house in Michigan every summer for nearly 20 years. From the outside, we looked exactly like what I thought we were. But I want to be honest with you now, because that's why I'm telling this story. Looking back, really looking back, the way you only can after something breaks, I can see the small things I explained away. The things I smoothed over in my own mind without even realizing it, like the way Gerald would sometimes go very quiet for days. Not sad exactly, just elsewhere. Like a man sitting in a room but thinking about a different one. I used to tell myself he was tired from work. Men carry stress differently, I thought. He just needs space. And then he'd come back, bring me coffee in the morning, ask about my day, and I'd forget all about those quiet spells. Or the phone calls. He'd step outside to take them sometimes, even in winter. I'd see him through the kitchen window, standing on the porch in his coat, talking low. When I asked who it was, he always had a simple answer. A colleague, his brother, someone from the sales team. I never pushed. I didn't want to be that kind of wife. The suspicious kind, the kind who doesn't trust her husband. I was so afraid of becoming that woman that I became a different kind of fool entirely. Our children grew up and moved away. David went to Colorado. Marie settled in Georgia with her husband and 2 boys. The house got quieter. Gerald and I moved through our days like 2 people who knew each other's habits perfectly, but had somehow stopped asking new questions. We weren't unhappy. That's what I kept telling myself. We weren't unhappy, we were just settled. There's a difference. I know that now. But then came that night. It was a Wednesday in March. Nothing special about it. Gerald had gone to bed early. I stayed up to finish a cup of tea and watch a little television. Around 11, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He'd left it there when he went upstairs, which wasn't unusual. I wasn't going to look at it. I want you to know that. I'm not a snooping woman. I never have been. But it buzzed again. And then again. 3 messages in a row, which made me think it might be one of the kids. An emergency, maybe. So I picked it up. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The name on the screen wasn't David. It wasn't Marie. It wasn't a colleague or his brother or anyone from a sales team. It was a woman's name I had never heard before. And the words she wrote, I won't repeat all of them here, but they were the kind of words you write to someone you have known for a long time. Someone you love. Someone who belongs to you in a way that has nothing to do with a wedding ring or a church or 31 years of quiet dinners. I stood in my kitchen in my robe and my slippers, and I felt the floor shift beneath me. Not in a dramatic way, not like a movie. It was quieter than that, slower, like watching something you built with your own hands begin to lean, and lean and lean until you finally understand that it was never standing straight to begin with. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I turned off the kitchen light, and I walked upstairs, got into bed beside my husband of 31 years, and lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. He was asleep, breathing slow and steady, the same way he had slept beside me for over 3 decades. And I thought, this man, this careful, decent, door-holding man, how long, and how did I not know? But the question that hurt the most, the one that kept me awake until the birds started outside the window, wasn't about him at all. It was about me. How much of my life had I spent believing in something that was only ever half real? I didn't say anything the next morning. Gerald came downstairs at his usual time, 6:55. He was always precise like that. He made his coffee, poured a glass of orange juice, and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper the way he had done 10,000 mornings before. He asked me if I'd slept well. I said yes. I buttered my toast. I looked out the window at the oak trees in the front yard. The March light was pale and thin, the kind of light that doesn't warm anything. And I sat across from the man I had built my entire life around, and I smiled at something he said, and I thought, you are a very good liar, Gerald. But so, it turns out, am I. Because that morning, I made a decision. I was not going to explode. I was not going to throw his phone across the room, or scream or cry at the kitchen table. That wasn't who I was, and honestly, I wasn't even sure yet what I was dealing with. One night of messages didn't tell me the whole story. Or maybe it did, but I needed to know more before I broke something that couldn't be put back together. So I waited. I became very still inside, like a lake in early morning before anyone has disturbed the surface. People who know me would probably be surprised by that. My sister always said I wore my heart on my sleeve. But grief, real grief, has a way of making you very quiet, very careful, very watchful. I started noticing things I had trained myself not to notice. The way he angled his phone away when he typed. Subtle. Something he'd probably been doing for a long time. I'd just never assigned it any meaning before. The way he sometimes came home from work a little later on Tuesdays and Thursdays, with explanations that were just slightly too smooth. Traffic, a late call, stop to get gas. Each one perfectly reasonable on its own. Together, they told a different story. I thought about a Tuesday the previous November. He'd come home an hour late and brought me flowers. Pink carnations, my favorites. I had been so pleased. I'd put them in the blue vase on the dining room table and told Marie about it on the phone the next day. Your father brought me flowers out of nowhere. Isn't that sweet? Standing in my kitchen that March, I felt sick remembering it. Those flowers weren't sweetness. They were a door being quietly closed. I want to pause here and say something, because maybe you have been in a moment like this. Not necessarily this situation, but a moment where something you once treasured suddenly looks completely different in a new light. Where a memory that made you smile now makes your chest ache. It is one of the strangest kinds of pain there is. You are not just losing the present, you are losing the past too. Piece by piece, you hand back your own memories and watch them change shape in front of you. That is what those weeks were like for me. I went through the motions of our life together. Cooked dinner, did the laundry, called the kids on weekends. Gerald and I watched television in the evenings the way we always had. Him in his chair, me on the sofa with a blanket over my legs. We talked about ordinary things, the neighbors, the weather, whether David was eating enough out there in Colorado. Normal conversation, safe conversation, the kind that asks nothing of either person. But underneath all of it, I was paying attention in a way I never had before. One evening, about 2 weeks after that night, I was putting away his freshly ironed shirts in the closet, something I had done for 30 years without a second thought, and I found a receipt tucked into the inside pocket of his gray blazer, a restaurant receipt, a place downtown I had never been to, dinner for two, a bottle of wine. The date was a Saturday in January, the same Saturday he had told me he was having lunch with his old college friend Ray. I stood in our closet holding that receipt for a long time. Ray. Gerald had mentioned Ray 3 or 4 times over the past year, an old friend reconnecting. I had thought nothing of it. I had even encouraged it. It's good that you're staying in touch with old friends, I had told him. Men your age need that. I almost laughed. But the sound that came out of me wasn't quite a laugh. I put the receipt in the pocket of my own cardigan, folded it small. I finished putting away his shirts. I smoothed down the sleeves the way I always did. And then I walked to the bathroom, ran the cold water, and pressed a wet cloth against my face until I felt steady again. That night at dinner, Gerald told me Ray was thinking of moving back to Cincinnati. I nodded and said that sounded nice. I passed him the bread. There is a certain kind of strength that women of my generation were raised to carry. Quiet strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that keeps the household running and the children fed and the surface of life smooth and unbroken, even when something underneath is fractured beyond repair. I don't know anymore if that strength is something to be proud of or something to mourn. Perhaps it is both. What I do know is this: the longer I stayed quiet, the more I learned. And the more I learned, the more I understood that the night I found those messages was not the beginning of anything. It was simply the night I stopped being able to pretend. The real story, Gerald's real story, went back much further than a buzzing phone on a Wednesday night in March. I could feel that truth settling over me slowly, the way snow settles. Quiet, weightless at first, and then, before you realize it, so heavy you can barely move. I knew I was going to have to face him. I just didn't know yet what I would say, or whether, after all those years, there were any words left that would mean anything at all. But the moment was coming. I could feel it approaching the way you feel a storm before the sky changes color. Something was going to break open, and when it did, nothing, not the oak trees, not the pearl earrings, not 31 years of quiet dinners, would ever look the same again. The moment came on a Sunday, not because I planned it for a Sunday, not because I had rehearsed what I would say or chosen the day carefully. It came on a Sunday because that was the day Gerald made a mistake. The first real, visible mistake he had made in, I suspect, a very long time. We had finished breakfast. He told me he needed to run an errand. Hardware store, he said. We needed light bulbs for the hallway fixture. A perfectly ordinary reason to leave the house on a Sunday morning. He was gone for 3 hours. When he came back, he had no light bulbs. He walked in through the side door, hung up his coat, and came into the living room where I was sitting with a book I hadn't been reading. And I looked at his hands, empty, no bag, no hardware store receipt, nothing. He didn't even realize it at first. He sat down in his chair and picked up the television remote. And I watched him, this careful, precise man who folded his napkin and held doors open for strangers. And I thought, you forgot. For the first time in 31 years, you forgot to cover your tracks. I said it quietly, no anger in my voice. I had moved past anger somehow, into something colder and more certain. I said, you didn't get the light bulbs. He looked up, and I saw it, just for a second, a flash of something behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, more like the look of a man who has been walking a tightrope for a long time and has just felt it tremble beneath his feet. He recovered quickly, said he'd forgotten, got distracted, would go back out later. And that was when I said, "Gerald, sit down, please." Something in my voice must have told him, because he didn't argue. He didn't make another excuse. He set the remote down on the arm of the chair, and he looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in years. And I asked him directly. I told him about the phone, the messages, the restaurant receipt in his blazer pocket. I told him I had known for weeks, that I had said nothing and watched and waited, and now I was done waiting. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked twice and then went silent. Gerald didn't deny it. That was the part I hadn't fully prepared myself for. Some part of me, the part that had believed in this marriage for 3 decades, had still been hoping he would deny it. That there would be an explanation, something that would let me put the receipt back in the blazer pocket and smooth down the sleeves and go back to not knowing. But he didn't deny it. He leaned forward in his chair with his elbows on his knees, and he looked at the floor. And he said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, smaller than his usual voice, older somehow, he said, "I'm sorry, Margaret." Just that. I'm sorry, Margaret. 31 years, 2 children, a lake house in Michigan, my grandmother's pearl earrings, and what he had to offer me was 4 words spoken to the carpet. I had thought I was past the point of crying. I had cried alone in the bathroom enough times over those weeks that I believed I had emptied myself out. But sitting there in our living room on that Sunday morning, something broke open in my chest that I hadn't known was still holding itself together. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears that came slowly and steadily, the way rain comes when it means to stay. I asked him how long. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said 4 years. 4 years. I did the math without meaning to. 4 years ago, David had just gotten married. We had danced together at the wedding, Gerald and I had thought, standing there in that reception hall with my son beaming across the room, we made it. We really made it. All those years of raising children and building a life, and we were still here, still together, still dancing. And even then, it was already happening. I asked him who she was. He told me her name, a woman he had met through work. Divorced. Lived about 40 minutes away. He said it hadn't started as anything serious, that it had just happened. I have heard those words before. It just happened. And I want to say something about them. Things like this do not just happen. They happen in steps. Small decisions, one after another. A conversation that goes a little longer than it should. A meeting that didn't need to happen. A phone call taken outside in the cold. Each step is a choice. And he made those choices, quietly and carefully, for 4 years, while I passed him the bread at dinner and put fresh flowers in the blue vase, and believed with my whole heart that we were happy. I told him that. I didn't shout it. I said it the same way I had said everything that morning, quietly, steadily, like a woman who has already done most of her falling apart in private and is now simply speaking the truth out loud. He listened. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain himself further or justify anything. To his credit, he gave me that much. He just sat in his chair and he listened, and when I finished, he said he was sorry again. More words this time. But by then, the word sorry had already lost most of its weight. We sat in silence for a long while after that. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people who know each other well. The other kind. The kind that sits in a room like a third person, heavy and shapeless and impossible to ignore. Eventually, I stood up. I told him I needed some time to think. I got my coat from the hook by the door, and I walked outside into the pale March air, and I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. until I found myself parked beside the small pond at the edge of our neighborhood, the one Gerald and I used to walk around when the kids were little. I sat there for a long time. The water was very still. A few bare trees stood at the edge of it, their branches just beginning to show the smallest hint of new buds. The first suggestion of spring in a world that still looked like winter. And I sat with 31 years of my life and tried to figure out which parts of it were real. The love had been real. I believed that even then. People can love each other and still wound each other in ways that don't heal easily. That is one of the hardest truths I have ever had to hold. The children were real. The lake house summers were real. The morning coffees and the Sunday drives and the way he used to reach over and take my hand at church without saying anything, those things were real. But something else had been real too, something I had refused to see. And now I had seen it. I could not unsee it. I did not leave Gerald that same week. I know some people might expect that. A woman finds out the truth, confronts her husband, and walks out the door, clean and decisive. But life, real life, especially at 63 years old, is rarely that clean. And I was not 25. I could not simply pack a bag and start over as if 31 years were a coat I could hang up and walk away from. So I stayed, and Gerald stayed, and we moved through the house like two people who had forgotten the steps to a dance they used to know by heart. He slept in the guest room. That was the first change. He offered. I didn't ask him to, but he offered, and I accepted without discussion. Some nights I would hear him moving around in there, the creak of the bed, the sound of the television low, and I would lie in our room, in the bed we had shared for 3 decades, staring at the ceiling and feeling the strange, hollow weight of a house that looks the same but isn't. He ended things with her. He told me so, and for reasons I cannot fully explain, I believed him. Not because I trusted him completely. That trust was gone, and I knew even then it would never fully return in the same shape. But because of the way he said it, something had gone out of him, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down, not in relief, but in shame. We did not tell the children right away. That was the hardest part in those early weeks. Talking to David and Marie on the phone, listening to them talk about their lives, their children, their ordinary worries, and saying nothing. Keeping my voice even, asking the right questions. Grandmothers do not fall apart on Sunday phone calls. At least, this grandmother didn't. But I told my sister Carol. Carol is 4 years older than me and has always been the kind of woman who says exactly what she thinks without apology. I drove to her house one afternoon, sat down at her kitchen table, and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which, if you know Carol, is remarkable. And when I finished, she reached across the table and took both my hands in hers and said, "What do you need, Margaret? Not what should you do. What do you need right now?" Nobody else had asked me that. I started to cry. Really cry, the way I hadn't let myself since that Sunday in the living room. And Carol just held my hands and let me, without trying to fix it or rush me through it or tell me what my next step should be. What I needed, it turned out, was exactly that, to be seen. To have someone look at me and see not the wife of Gerald Harmon, not the mother of David and Marie, not the woman who keeps everything running smoothly, but just me, Margaret, a woman who was hurting and confused and tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch. Gerald and I began seeing a counselor in April. It was his suggestion, which surprised me. I had not expected him to suggest it, but he did, quietly, one morning over coffee. He said he wasn't asking me to forgive him. He said he just didn't want to give up without trying to understand how they had gotten here. how they had both gotten here. I agreed. Not because I was certain I wanted to save the marriage. I wasn't certain of anything at that point. I agreed because I had questions that I needed answered in a room with someone trained to hold difficult conversations. And because after 31 years, I felt I owed myself, and perhaps even him, the chance to understand before deciding. Those sessions were not easy. There were things said in that small office, quiet things, painful things, that I had never said out loud in 31 years of marriage. Not just about his betrayal, about me too. About the ways I had made myself small without realizing it. The way I had learned to read Gerald's silences and work around them instead of ever asking what they meant. The way I had confused a calm surface with genuine happiness and told myself that was enough. The counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Ellison, said something during one of our sessions that has stayed with me ever since. She said that sometimes in long marriages, two people slowly stop telling each other the truth. Not out of dishonesty, but out of protection. They protect each other from difficult feelings, from needs that feel like burdens, from truths that might disturb the peace they have worked so hard to build. And in doing so, she said, they slowly become strangers who know each other's habits very well. I thought about that for a long time, because it wasn't entirely wrong. Gerald had hidden something enormous from me. I will never minimize that. But I had also hidden things, smaller things. The loneliness I felt when the kids left and he didn't seem to notice. The times I had wanted more conversation, more closeness, more of him actually present in the room. And instead of saying so, I had made another cup of tea and turned on the television and told myself I was content. We had both been performing a version of our marriage for a long time. His performance had involved a far greater betrayal. That is simply true, and I will not pretend otherwise. But understanding my own part in the distance between us, not the blame, but my part, gave me something I hadn't expected. It gave me back a small piece of myself. Gerald and I did not have a dramatic reconciliation. There was no grand moment of forgiveness where everything was suddenly healed and the music swelled and we held each other in the kitchen and knew it was going to be all right. That is not how it went. What happened was slower and quieter and far more honest than anything we had managed in years. And know that surviving something that should have broken you is not weakness. It is not foolishness. It is its own quiet kind of strength. The oak trees in the front yard are still there. They have grown taller over the years. Their roots go deeper than anyone walking by would ever guess. So do mine.